There are different things that matter to different people. To those in business, profit matters. And sometimes they work long, long hours, focusing on the bottom line. But few business people ever come to the end of their lives wishing they had spent more time at work. To some, what matters is power. Political power. Power in government. But many who have served in political life realize eventually that power didn't matter much at all. This sermon comes from a book written by Haddon W. Robinson called What Jesus Said About Successful Living. And I kind of have a funny story to tell about this book, but I'm not going to tell it now. But Haddon Robinson wrote, "How do we judge between what matters and what seems to matter? What matters and what seems to matter is often hard to distinguish. How will the world know that we have judged wisely between what matters and what seems to matter?" Jesus' disciples never asked the question, but he gave them a surprising answer anyway. He told them they mattered, but he said it in a curious way. You are the salt of the earth. Now, Jesus' disciples had very little influence in life. They weren't political leaders. They weren't born of nobility. They were just ordinary people. Some of them were fishermen. Some of them may have been farmers. And one was a tax collector. And they had not made themselves famous or made their mark in the business community. None of them were very religious. But to those mostly educated men, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." And you notice I put emphasis on you. That's what Jesus did. That is an emphatic you. So that means you and I are the salt of the earth, or we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Now, in the ancient world, salt was valuable. And it was valuable for several reasons. And from those reasons, we may learn what Jesus meant by saying, "You are the salt of the earth." Salt was valued as seasoning. And we know what salt means to food, don't we? It brings out the flavor. Salt is good to a point. My wife will tell you that I eat too much salt. But it's good. Jesus was saying that his disciples are to bring flavor to the lives of other people. For many people in the world today, life is empty and hopeless. And they need salty people to help them bring flavor to their lives. They need folks to help them realize that there's a much better life here on this earth, and that there can be hope and meaning in our lives. Christians have experienced the grace of God. So we are to be the salt to try to bring flavor to people's lives. Now, unfortunately, being salt hasn't and isn't always true of Christians. Unfortunately, that is true. Some time ago, a survey was done on what outsiders thought of the church. And respondents had 3 negative reactions. First of all, the church always asked for money. Secondly, the church was always sad. And third, they always talked about death. Well, we have to a point. This sadness thing, I don't know if they looked at the people that were in the church and they saw that they never smiled or what. But if we want to be salt of the earth, we've got to smile, folks. We have something to smile about, okay? And then, the first one asked for money. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Not too often, but, we have our missions offerings. We have about, 3-4 mission offerings a year. Then we have needs. If we want to maintain the church, we have to have money. So sometimes we ask for money. And we do talk about death, especially the death of Jesus, because if not for the death of Jesus in our place, we'd have no reason to be here. But you know what? That kind of salt, where we're sad, no smiles, we don't seem happy as Christians. Folks, that salt doesn't have much flavor. So remember that. Remember that. Now, Jesus was saying to his disciples then and now that we matter. Folks, as Christians, we matter. And we matter when we make the effort to help those who are living in darkness to understand that life can be pleasant and it can be enjoyable. First century people considered salt as a symbol of purity because it was glistening white. The earliest pagans offered salt to the gods. And God gave the law to Moses, and in Leviticus 2:13, we read, "You are to season each of your grain offerings with salt." Without the salt, that offering was unacceptable to God. So when Jesus said, "We're the salt of the earth," he had in mind that we are valuable. We are valuable when we display the purity of our lives before a sinful culture. Excuse me. In a culture that has perfected the art of lying, we as Christians need to always be honest. In a world full of immorality, our lives should stand for sexual and moral purity. Now, salt also creates thirst. Even today, the Arabs eat salt to make them drink liquids to avoid dehydration from the desert heat. Salt forces them to drink even before they realize they need a drink. So Jesus knows that we are valuable when we cause people to thirst for God. In Jesus' day, they had a quality of salt in mind as a preservative. Fishermen used the salt to preserve their catch until they got it to market. Farmers used salt to preserve their meat. And some of you remember, if you grew up on the farm, killing hogs, and some of that meat was used to preserve the hog meat. Probably hung hams in the smokehouse at one time. But in Jesus' day, that was the only way they had of preserving heat. So Jesus knows that righteous people matter when they are a preservative against evil and rot in our communities. Being the salt of the earth, we can prevent the spread of evil in our communities. Now, Jesus implied a couple of things if we are to be the salt of the earth. And the first one is we must be in touch with our culture. You see, folks, for salt to be effective, it has to touch the meat. It has to touch the food. You remember long ago that monks would withdraw from the public to stay away from evil. But folks, that is not the biblical example. Jesus sent his disciples as sheep among wolves. And folks, that's where we are called to go. Jesus has told us to go. He has commanded us to go. He's commissioned us to go. He has said, you are the salt of the earth, and you can't be salt and stay within the church walls. We are not to allow the evil culture to affect our lives, but we are to have an effect on the lives of people and the evil that is all around us. When the church becomes a salt warehouse, that means we keep our salt in here. When it becomes a salt warehouse, it has missed Jesus' basic lesson that salt must come in contact with meat. If we don't relate to unchurched people, if we don't relate to non-Christians in our community, we will never make a difference in our community or in the culture. The second thing we must be aware of is in the last two sentences of Matthew 5:13. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled on by men. We must keep our saltiness. We must not lose it. We must keep it. In Jesus' day, there were two kinds of salt. There was the somewhat pure salt that was made through the evaporation of clean seawater. But most of the salt in Palestine came from the Dead Sea, which was filled with white minerals that resembled salt. Farmers would pile that salt near their homes. And they would fertilize their fields. There's some soil that salt will help. And so they fertilized their fields with it. But when the rains came and pounded those piles of salt, the true salt, sodium chloride, would wash away and it became useless. When that happened, they would throw it on the ground to make a hard path to walk on. So that's what Jesus is referring to here when he says the salt was thrown out and trampled on by men, by people. When salt loses its saltiness, it is worthless. And unfortunately, that is true of too many Christians who are called to be salt in their community. If we don't display our Christian characteristics, our Christian qualities, and we become like the culture, then we will make no impact. We become the problem instead of the solution. And that must not happen. We must not be a salt warehouse. Now, Christians matter when their lives display the love and the grace of God in their community. We can help stop the spread of evil if we will make contact with people in our community. We just need to show them we care. We just need to be out there. We need to be seen out there. But we must come in contact with people, or we will not make a difference in their lives. If we really belong to Jesus and we are beatitude people, we will be salt in our community and in our culture. Now, how will the world know that we have judged wisely between what matters in the world and what seems to matter? The answer is that we must first accept Jesus' judgment that we matter to Him. Folks, Christians are important to Jesus. We are significant because we have a significant role to play in His plan for the world and His plan for our lives. And on that basis, that we are important to Him, we can decide wisely how to spend our lives. In pouring out our lives like salt, we will find our true value. Maria, is there anything we need to pray about? Okay. All right. In pouring out our lives like salt, we will find our true value. We will find the meaning, a more meaningful life that Jesus came to give us. Now remember, Jesus did not call us to be sugar. He called us to be salt. And sometimes salt irritates. Sometimes it makes the wolves come after us. Okay? But salt preserves. It preserves. Because Jesus called us to make a difference, it is important that we be the salt of the earth. The world will know that we have chosen wisely when we reveal the true godly values of life. So between what matters and what seems to matter, we should know what counts, because we count to God. Are we salty or are we saltless? Are we the salt of the earth, or has our salt lost its flavor? I hope you'll give that consideration about your Christian life and what Jesus has called us to do. Excuse me. There are many people out there that don't think knowing Jesus as Savior and Lord is important. We know that it is. And because we are important to God, He wants us to let them know that knowing Him as Savior and Lord is important to them. Pray with me.